So in the last video we were discussing the crossed signals hypothesis, which is basically that whites and blacks have completely different communication methods, and part of the reason why we can't get along is that we're just not operating on the same frequency, basically. And whites are doing everything they can to make blacks feel better, and it's not working. And why is that? Well, let's consider some stories, picking up where we left off. Consider, in the light of this hypothesis, a number of incidents that have received media coverage in the United States in the past few years. Number 1. A father wrote a short letter to the New York Times describing the theft of his son's bicycle by blacks. Both of my bicycle thefts were committed by blacks. But that's just a stereotype. A father wrote a short letter to the New York Times describing the theft of his son's bicycle by blacks, as a consequence of which his son, quote, no longer wants to be around black kids, end quote. A black asked by the editorial board to respond wrote, quote, the young men who jumped your son and took his bike saw a little white boy with a bike whose parents can afford to buy him another one. The synergy of race and class privilege allowed them to act. In the end, it is your example that will best help him heal. The black friends who come to your home, whom your son sees you socialize with, will reassure him. He's been introduced to something painful about race. By accident of birth, he is white and male and economically secure in a city where many others are none of those things. End quote. Apart from the dubious proposition that the thieves asked themselves whether the bike was replaceable, it is suggested that they were entitled to the bicycle and, above all, that responsibility for any ill will that may result lies with the boy's parents. It is not suggested that any black should make any gesture toward the boy. Next example. When black Washington Mayor Marion Barry was arrested for possession of crack cocaine, prominent blacks complained that whites were out to get black officials. Reporters, skeptical of the charge itself, nonetheless judged it understandable that blacks would believe this, and the Barry case came to symbolize the difficulties facing successful blacks. Next example. To escape her stepfather's wrath at her partying, a 15-year-old black girl named Tawana Brawley covered herself in dog feces, wrote NIG word, eat poop, eat, on her chest, and claimed to have been graped by white policemen. She immediately came to represent the suffering of black women. When her story was found to be fraudulent, its plausibility to blacks was cited as evidence of white police brutality and the sexual advantage taken by white men of black women. Well, man, do I have a chart for you. You think white guys want to grape black women? I know I don't, and I know that I speak for basically all white men. And in case you're dubious about who's graping who, let me just put some stuff on the screen. If you are unable to read these graphs, then you're probably too stupid to be racist. But let me explain. 0% of the grapes are white men on black women. It doesn't happen. Maybe not never, ever, ever, but statistically never. Black on white grape is infinitely more. And you wonder why I'm racist? Seriously? Why are you not? Because you don't know about this? Well, why don't you know about it? Who's not telling you? Why is this not on the news? I'll give you a hint. It rhymes with news. Next example. Edmund Perry was a Harlem teenager recruited on full scholarship by Exeter, an exclusive New England preparatory school. Perry appears to have been performing academically at about the white average, far below the level normally required for admission to an elite institution. A few weeks after graduating, he was killed by a plainclothes policeman he was attempting to rob. Angry demonstrations ensued, and Perry's act was attributed to Exeter's alienating atmosphere. It wasn't his fault. His school had an alienating atmosphere. You know, have you ever felt alienated and wanted to rob somebody? You can relate, right? Well, I guess it depends on the color of who's listening. New York Magazine found it significant that his white classmates preferred the Rolling Stones and slighted Perry's interest in soul music. The horror. Oh my God. When people don't like the same music as me, I just need to rob, you know? His death was taken to indicate the many steps whites still had to take to make blacks feel comfortable. Next example. In 1989, 8 black teenagers beat, graped, and left for dead a jogger in New York's Central Park. They explained that they graped the woman because, quote, it was fun, end quote, and described their activity as wildin', which proved to be a black colloquialism for banding together to commit random violence. Why don't white people have a euphemism for that? Huh. Many prominent blacks criticized the media for calling attention to the boys' attitude and language. Of course they did. Next example. In Milwaukee, black alderman Michael McGee announced the formation of a black militia for the shooting of white people if his district was denied more money. Quote, our militia will be about violence. I'm talking actual fighting, bloodshed, and urban guerrilla warfare. End quote. While McGee drew some muted criticism, a white alderman commented, quote, he is certainly pricking our conscience about the real world. It's a legitimate question. Where are our priorities when you spend millions for downtown amenities and dribbles for the neighborhood? End quote. The New York Times referred to McGee's threats, as well as increasingly frequent black looting, as, quote, a cry of despair, end quote. They're poor, and it's our fault. Cough up the money, or we'll unalive you. That's not a cry of despair. That is a threat. Next example. At the University of North Carolina at Greensboro, where a black student center was already housed in a campus building, blacks demanded a freestanding, separate building of their own. After numerous demonstrations, the administration reluctantly granted their wish. But when it was decided that the building would be placed across the street from the main campus rather than on it, further demonstrations, backed by rap music, were staged. When asked to explain their purpose, one black student said, quote, I start from the fact that my great-grandfather was a slave, end quote. Another black student told a group of whites, quote, I don't think it's the responsibility of black people to step outside of who we are, end quote. Not only is it not their responsibility, it's not a possibility, it seems. If it's genetic, they're not going to change. So let's give up on that, okay? Placating and giving in and patronizing and guilt, none of these are working. We need a different strategy. I'm open to ideas, but it just seems like we don't get along. And what do you do when you don't get along with someone? Do you keep hanging out with them anyway? Next example. After a black youth was witnessed shooting to death a district attorney actively prosecuting gangs in Boston, the first and angry demand of black spokesmen was that black teenagers not be rounded up in, quote, sweeps. The Boston Police Department complied, indicating in public statements that its first priority was not apprehending the murderer, but ensuring that racism would not be indulged. Avoiding hurting black people's feelings, apparently, is more important than catching a killer. Our white goodwill, our good character, is being weaponized against us. We should stop being so nice. We have to. If it was just a white society, we could be so nice to the other white people. And we should continue to be very nice. And I'm not saying you should be mean to black people, but we have to be honest and not take any shit, not accept emotional blackmail. There's a difference between being nice and kind and understanding and patient and being a pussy bitch doormat. In each case, black misbehavior was represented as victimization and proof of how much more whites must do to earn black trust. Spoiler, we're never going to get it. And do we really want it? Or, okay, maybe we want it, but how much are we willing to pay? It's a moot point because we're never going to get it no matter how much we pay. In each case, blacks adopting aggressive postures leveled accusations that whites, for the most part, accepted. We need to stop accepting the premise of these ridiculous arguments. We are not guilty of anything. Whatever the opposite of guilty is, that's what we are, okay? Warrants issued for the arrest of members of the Brawley family involved in the hoax did not result in arrests. That's the one who pretended to be assaulted by the cops. Looking beyond these particular incidents, there have been some appeals by high-profile blacks to end black-on-black crime, but to my knowledge, no apology for black-on-white crime, nor any demand from whites for one. That needs to change. Everyone's afraid to bring up the statistics, even if they do know about them, which most people don't. If you know about crime statistics and you are afraid to mention them, you're a disgrace. You put the race in disgrace. On behalf of the intelligent whites, we're ashamed to have idiots that are unable to grasp reality or cowards who are afraid to. A biological component in the dialectic of black anger and white bafflement seems probable. In other words, it's genetic. It's not going to change. Let's stop trying to put a round peg in a square hole. That's the end of that section. Next one will be about sick and dysfunctional value systems. Quote sick, quote dysfunctional. See you in the next video.